this video we're going to go through creating contact poses for the basic walk. As you can see, we already have our character open here and have our background imported around our character. So to start out, we want to start at the bottom of the character, and first thing we want to do is make sure we rotate our feet out in rotate Y for balance and appeal. So this is going to make sure that the feet aren't completely symmetrical, facing straight forward, but also give the character wider balance and make it look more appealing as the character walks forward. So from here, let's step forward with one foot, and I'm going to switch my camera shot over to my side orthographic view so I can see the distance between the heel and toe. I want the distance between the heel and toe to be a little less than a foot length. You want to make sure you have a good distance between the heel and toe, that it's not too short, because if it's too short, you're going to end up making more steps and making things a bit more difficult for yourself mechanics-wise and work-wise, as you have to put in more poses. If the steps are too long, it makes it difficult for the character to push off and get into his next steps in mechanics-wise. So want to make sure it's about the distance of 1 foot length, just a little shorter than a foot length between the heel and toe. So we're going to start there, and then on our front foot, since the front foot is going to be landing our contact pose, we're going to push our heel channel. And we don't want it completely flat like that, so we want to give some flexibility in it, so we're going to use toe lift as well. Now on the back foot, we're going to use lift heel so that the foot is actually rolling up off the ground. Right now, currently, that leg is locking out. We can see it's hyperextending, and we never want that to happen in our scene. We never want to have that hyperextension there. So we need to actually manually make sure that the foot is lifting up off the ground, lifting the heel up off of the ground, and we can tell that by when we push it enough that it gives a little bit of bend in our knee. So you can see as I continue to push that, the knee starts to bend. And then let's translate this pole vector forward so you can clearly see that better, because if the knee pole vectors are too close to the legs, you can see it starts to kind of flip a little bit. Alright, so again, seeing this in our side ortho view, and we can come out a little bit more, and then tone that down some. Now, not only do we want to pay attention to our stride, the length of our stride in our side ortho view, we also want to check how wide apart our feet are, and that's going to be the translate X on the feet. It's highly recommended that you keep these equidistant. What I mean by that is the translate X on the feet should be come in the same amount on each foot. If you leave it at 0, you may find that the character has to shift his weight a lot on his passing poses in order to remain balanced over the supporting foot. While not incorrect, it can make for a really swaying kind of cowboy walk. If you want something a bit more controlled, recommend bringing your feet in closer together as you're creating your contact poses. So in this case, grab this red foot here, should go +2 to bring that in, and this one should be moving in the negative direction. So the inverse of that, to keep them equidistant, would be -2. So whichever value you choose for one foot, you basically just want to mirror it on the other foot. That way they both come in together the same amount. We're going to move up to our cog, and this is where we're going to start creating our curve progression. Now the curve progression is going to be very important here. You want to keep in mind that the rotation of the hips is going to be dictated by the position of the feet. If the left leg is forward, the left side of the hip should be forward. And because both the feet are on the ground on a contact pose, that means that the hips should be level. So really the rotation that we're worried about now is going to be the rotate Y, because this leg is forward, so it's going to pull that side of the hips. The hips aren't going to have any kind of rotate Z. They're not going to have any rotate X on there. That can stay until final finessing when we deal with rotate X. But rotate Z is going to be 0 on contact poses. And the translate X, again, is going to be halfway between the feet, because we want to make sure that the carriage is in balance. This is also why we kept our feet equidistant in translate x. As long as the feet are equidistant in translate x, such as -2 and 2, the translate x of the cog will be 0, because that's going to be halfway between those two values. So as we rotate our hips here and push it, don't want to push it too far. You can find about in the 20 to 30-ish area is usually good enough, but I'm going to go ahead and type in a whole number to keep things clean here. So at -25 there. Now I'm going to work my way up the rest of the body, keeping in mind that these three back controls will work together. They will rotate in the same direction, working together to counter what the hips are doing. So if the hips are rotated in Y in the negative direction, these three back controls, the torso controls, should rotate in the positive direction. So let's start by going at the low back here and typing in 5. And what we're going to do is gradually increase our values as we go up. 15 and let's say 20, because what we want to have happen is for the shoulders to actually rotate with the torso going with the arm swing, and the arms are going to swing opposite of the legs. So we want that torso, the shoulder right here, to kind of jut forward a little bit. And to show you what I mean, let's go ahead and get the arms in position. Again, so the arms are swinging opposite of the legs. So since blue leg is forward, red arm is coming forward. And then this one will go back. So with that in there, now we can kind of push our actual shoulder controls forward, but we can already see that the torso is driving the shoulder forward. You can see how we've rotated it. It's starting to push that shoulder forward so that it is being effectively being pulled by this arm. And that's what we want to have happen, is the back controls will counter what the hips are doing, because the back controls are being influenced by the movement of the arms. I'll grab the shoulder and push it forward just a little bit like that. Back a little bit. May even want to pull it out some so it doesn't collapse inside the body. Alright, so now let's move up to our neck. And for this, to position the head, we're going to be using the up neck control. Not going to use the low neck or the head control. The reason for that is we want to keep it centered onto one control. We don't want to use all three of them, because if something goes wrong, it's harder to track down where that something is. So we're going to only use one control, and this control gives us the best posing for the passing poses that we'll get into later. So may as well put everything on this control to keep things simple. To do this, we're going to go to our ortho front view, and we need our head to remain facing straight forward. So the neck controls are going to counter what we did in the torso. Our torso was rotated in positive in rotate Y, so our neck control is going to go negative. So let's see if with a -20, not quite facing straight forward there. But -15 will have him facing straight forward. And then we can get into the finessing of this pose. So things we want to keep in mind: don't want to leave the antenna symmetrical. That's really bad. We want to go ahead and pose our antenna and make sure they're clear for our camera shot and not twinning. So check our camera shot again, and let's go ahead and have the back antenna, the red antenna, rotate down more, since it'll give us the better silhouette without crossing over in front of one of the other antenna or anything. And then blue antenna can kind of come back and then forward. Now we don't quite see our eyes clearly in our camera shot. You can see we're seeing a lot of white of the eyes, but not enough of the pupils and iris. So let's cheat our eyes to the camera by translating over to the side a little bit and X, and then maybe a little bit down so we can more clearly see the pupils and iris there. And lastly, don't want to leave the hands in the default position. Now, unless you have something in mind that what you're trying to do with your hands, I'm going to show you a very basic hand position to get your hands into for a relaxed pose. Notice we will not be using the fist or the spread channel. If you want the character to actually make a fist, cool, use the fist channel. But the reason why I'm typically avoid these is because they all rotate the joints uniformly, which doesn't create very clear poses if you're not actually using them to their fullest. So if you want the character to make a fist, fine, use it up to 20, make a fist, but don't do it halfway and leave it at 4.5 because that's not really a nice pose. That's just everything rotating uniformly. So first, let's grab our index spread and bring our fingers in a bit closer together and do the same thing for our pinky spread. And with our hands relaxed, our pinky tends to curl more and our fingers get straighter as we get towards our index. So I'm going to start our index finger, straighten it out a little bit, and then work our way down to our middle and give it a little bit of curl, and then our pinky and give it more curl. And then we use our thumb drop. This is going to bring our thumb in towards our palm. It's going to drop it in that way, so it's not lining up the side of the hand. And then we're going to bring it in closer to the other fingers using thumb root and thumb one, for a more natural, relaxed pose for the fingers. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other hand. So now we have our first contact pose, including the fingers. Let's go ahead and key that. And to make our second contact pose, we're just going to be mirroring everything forward. So first, it's important that we know what kind of timing we're going to be using on our walk. You want to have a timing that's divisible by 4. So between most contact poses, you're going to have either 12 or 16. A 12 frame walk is what we're going to be doing here. It gives us a more sprightly, energetic, more natural kind of walk. 16 frame walk is a little bit slower, makes the character a bit more lazy, lackadaisical, and so forth. So you do have the option of doing a 16 frame walk if that's what fits the character's personality. When we get slower than 16 frames, then it becomes more difficult to actually create the poses of the walk because of the mechanics involved and how the character has to shift his weight on poses and so forth. If you get faster than 12 frames, then we're getting closer to like power walking, running kind of thing. So generally not going to be moving that fast. So for purposes of our demonstrations here, we're going to be using a 12 frame walk. That means that 12 frames after frame 1 is where our next contact is going to be. So that would mean next contact, 1 plus 12 is going to put it at 13. And let's go ahead and turn to our side ortho view again, because we also want to make sure that we get a good stride in our walk. That's the distance between the heel and the toe again. So we want to make sure that it is fairly consistent throughout our walk. It doesn't have to be exact, but we want to make sure that the character isn't taking a long stride and then a shorter stride, because that can also mess up the timing, the spacing of the character's walk, and he'll kind of hitch up and kind of freeze a little bit before he shoots forward and everything. So we want to keep that fairly even. So since the blue foot now is going to become the back foot, we're going to leave it in place while we pull the red foot in both hands and the cog and the eyes and the elbows forward a bit. And then continue on with the red foot. And then we're just going to start from the bottom and work our way up as before. So let's start with this really broken looking back foot. Since this is the back foot now, we don't need heel and toe lift. We're going to zero those out. But we will need lift heel. Now you can see as much as I'm pushing this, it's not really showing anything and the leg is locking out. It's partially due to how much I've translated the hips forward, but also because the curve progression isn't correct yet. So I pull the hips back a little bit so I can see what the leg is going to be doing. Then move over to our other foot, which is now the front foot. I can get rid of my left heel and add in heel and toe lift. Once more, you can notice that the leg is locking out, but also the distance between the heel and toe isn't really that great. So we're going to want to make sure that it's a bit more consistent with our previous step. So we can pull it forward more. Now as we work our way up to the cog, our hips, since they're just translating forward, we want to keep in mind that the rotation in the hips is dictated by the position of the feet. So now that the opposite foot is forward, the opposite side of the hips should be rotated forward now. This basically means that as we're working our way from the hips on up through the torso and the neck, that we're just going to invert the values. So before, where we had negative 25, we can go ahead and get rid of that negative part and make it positive. You can see that adds a lot more give into that back leg, which we can use to further make sure that the hips are centered between the heel and toe here. As we go up to our low back, before we had positive 5, so we're just going to type in a negative to inverse that. And then do the same thing as we're working our way up the rest of our back controls. Finally, we're going to grab our neck and get rid of the negative on that. And if we check this in our front ortho view, we can see that that does keep the head straight, because all we did was just reverse all the values that we had before, and before the head was staying straight. So just inverting them just make sure that the rotations are all going in the same degree, just in a different direction. Now obviously the arms are incorrect because the arm should swing opposite of the legs. So if this leg is forward, that means that this arm should be the one that comes forward. And then we take the other arm back. And we can adjust our shoulders. Since that arm is going forward, make sure that shoulder kind of comes forward a little bit with it. And that arm's going back, so kind of pull it back and have that shoulder going backwards a bit. So again, checking this in our front and our side ortho view to make sure the character is in balance between this heel and toe, and making sure that all rotations are correct before we go ahead and key that. So now we have first contact, second contact. Now, from here, the good thing is once you have your first 2 contact poses, you can copy them forward. Because the character is just walking in a straight line, and walk poses are simply repeated back and forth over and over again. Once you have those first 2, one with the red foot forward, then one with the blue foot forward, all you have to do is basically take those values and just shift them forward when you're making contacts after that. So we're going to demonstrate that on a step. So once more, if we're going to take another step, we're doing on a 12 frame walk, we're going to add 12 to what we already have here. We're going to put our next contact on 25. Now the contacts on 25 is going to have the blue foot forward. Well, we already have a pose where the blue foot was forward. It was back here on frame 1. So to do this, what we're going to do is what we call middle mouse copying. And what we mean by middle mouse copying is by using middle mouse in a timeline, we're going to take the values from one frame and put them on another frame. So normally if we left mouse drag in the timeline, you can see that things update normally. This is using left mouse button on the mouse. You can see that once I get to 13, the post changes. Using middle mouse in the timeline allows us to scrub in the timeline without the scene updating. So now when I'm using middle mouse, you can see once I get past 13, the pose doesn't change. It still stays like it was at frame 1. This is really important to animators to speed up your workflow, and this is what we're going to use to basically get the values from frame 1 onto frame 25. So again, we know that we need a pose that looks like this on frame 25. It'll just be further forward. So I'm going to take what we have at frame 1, I'm going to middle mouse in the timeline to 25, and then I'm going to key it so we have some keys to manipulate and so it stays in place. Now obviously now when I left mouse drag, he's going to take a step forward and then he's going to take a step back because 25 is now just a copy of frame 1. That's not exactly what we want. That's half of what we want. What we want is for that red foot to stay in place and the blue foot to step forward instead of the red foot stepping back. So to make this happen, we're again going to use middle mouse copy to keep the red foot in place this time. But this time we're going to use the values that we have on frame 13 when the red foot was in front. On 25, the red foot should become the back foot, so it should still be in the same spot from 13 to 25. So from this step to this step, the red foot should stay in place and the blue foot should be the one that's going to move forward. So to accomplish that, we're just going to select the red foot, and on 13 we're going to middle mouse over to 25, and then we'll come over here and we're only going to key the translations and rotations on that foot. We're not going to use our mail button. We're not going to key all the channels on the foot. The reason for that is we just want it to stay in place. We don't want to change the heel and lift heel and so forth because that is supposed to change from one contact to the next. And we don't want to key the entire character because we're only concerned with the red foot right now staying in place. So we're just going to highlight the translation and rotations over here, right click, and key selected. So that's going to overwrite the key that was there before on the red foot. Now if you've been following along, you probably can guess what's going to happen is that once I left mouse drag off of this, we're going to get a pretty messed up looking pose as he steps forward there and then pulls back, but the red foot stays in place. As long as this control is in place, that's what we want to happen. We want that control to stay in place there. So now that we're on 25, now all we have to do is grab the other controls in the world space, which will be the opposite foot, the cog, using shift select, both hands, both elbow pull vectors, and the eyes. So we grab all of those, then we can just translate them all forward until we get the character back in balance and that red foot looks natural. And once we have that, again, rekey it with our mail button. So now, left mouse dragging, you can see takes a step forward and then takes another step forward. So to review, when you're doing your contact poses, you want to first make sure that you have your feet rotated out. Make sure you're using the correct feet channels with the heel and toe lift on the front foot and lift heel on the back foot. Really pay attention to your curve progression. This is going to be the start of creating your curve progression, and you're going to be focusing on the rotate Y. The rotate Y is going to be the extreme on the contact poses. Rotate Z should be 0. So you're going to find that the hips will rotate to support the positioning of the legs. The 3 back controls will rotate together to support the arm position, which means that the 3 back controls will rotate opposite of what the hips are doing. And then the neck will rotate opposite of what the back controls are doing in order to keep the head facing straight forward. Once you have those poses in, you can always continue to copy forward with the rest of your contact poses as many times as needed to get to your destination in the scene. And once we have the contacts, then we can move on to our passing poses. Thanks for watching.